Let's pray. We thank you for all the blessings of this life. We pray this morning for Laura that you would be with her and give her strength and comfort. That family, that you would others who need your care and need your comfort. Our first week we talked and nobody. The best way to overcome sin is if we put on and have the mind of Christ. So we told and talked about some things that would give us the mind of Christ. And then last week we talked about selfishness and how sometimes the world makes us selfish. So this week we're going to talk about wasteful and being wasteful. Good morning. Steve, how are you? So far, so good, unless you've heard something. I'm doing good unless you've heard something. I understand. Just 2 or 3? What do we waste our time on today?
TV.
Phone? Yes. Phone. Internet? Social media? Television? Worrying? I'll back up a little bit so I can see you down here. Miss Sharon, you feeling better? Good. How about over here? Bob? Okay. Amen. Scott, was you just stretching there or just? I understand. So we waste our time on a lot of different things. What about our children? What do our children waste their time on? Basically everything except TV, because they don't watch a lot of TV. But internet, sports, different things, video games. I know through my life I've wasted a lot of time on things that didn't matter to a hill of beans. I was going to close with these 3 verses, but I'm going to start off with them because I very rarely get to the end of my lesson. So I'm going to start with this first. James 4:13 through 17. Come now, you say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such town, spend a year there, and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For it is a mist, appears for a little time, and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. For whoever knows the right thing and to do and fails to do it, to him it is sin. We're here for a short time, and we really don't have a lot of time to waste, do we? There's things that we can do or things that we don't do, but we have to be careful not to waste our time, our resources, our talents. Luke 10:27, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, as your neighbor as yourself. When you meditate on that verse, who are we going to put first in our lives? What did you say, Carol? God. Very good. I thought I read your lips. So it's God. So again, that helps us set our priorities and not waste our time. Matthew 6:33. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So if we seek God first, we're going to watch what we do, aren't we? Waste can be tied to the priorities that we set in our lives, the choices that we make every day, and distractions that affect us all. I think in America, there's so much abundance. There's so much of everything that it promotes a wasteful attitude. You have so much stuff out there, you know, I'll eat this, and if I don't want the rest of it, I just throw it away. There's so much stuff. When we do things into an excess, Friday afternoon, I could have left work, and this is going back to Rhonda's. I could have left work, been home at 12, and I could have watched ball games from 12 to 11:30 that night. What a waste of time, especially after yesterday. Just a waste of time. Amen? Amen. Okay. We waste our knowledge. God has all given us brains to think with, our intellect. We waste those things. We waste our money. We waste our talents, our treasures, our passions, our time, our service. Sometimes we waste our love that we have. So let's go back to what we were talking about for the whole lesson. Luke 15:13. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. The younger son is said to have wasted his possessions with prodigal living. I reckon I've always thought prodigal meant he just left home. But prodigal has a deeper meaning, doesn't it? Prodigal means reckless, wasteful, and wicked. So prodigal living means to live in such a way that we waste everything that God gives us. The younger son had taken all the money that his father had given him. He wasted it on parties and friends. He did not use it wisely, and he ended up feeding the pigs. Pigs are not the most popular animal for Jewish people. The question we need to answer is why the prodigal or wasteful living always seems to lead to bad things. When we live a wicked, wasteful life, it doesn't end up good, ever. To help us understand this maybe a little better, let's look at another parable Jesus told. Matthew 12, or 25, 12, or 14 through 30. I'll get it in a minute. In this story, we are told that a man was entrusted his money to his servants. Two of the servants did something with the money, and one just buried it, the amount he was given. When the man returned and seeing how things were going, the servants who had invested their resources were given more. But the lazy man who did nothing had his resources taken away from him. The lesson here is that God gives us all time. He gives us treasures. He gives us talents. All that we have is entrusted to us by God. He wants us to invest them in good things that will please Him and further His kingdom. But when we neglect to use those things in a way that pleases God and to further His kingdom, it's not a good thing. It's wasteful. God has made us to serve Him and give Him glory. To me, that's our mission in life, is to glorify God and do things that will please Him. If we don't, we're going to lose them. God, because to give our time, treasure, and talent to anybody else other than God is a misuse of what God has given us. So I told briefly what I'd read prodigal is. Do you all have any other ideas what prodigal means or prodigal living? Carol?
One thing that comes to mind is not being accountable. And that's when, with prodigal living, it means living recklessly and living without accountability, as if it didn't matter, and as if there was an abundance to cover that recklessness, and not realize until it was gone.
Too late, right? Anybody else have any? I thought Jake had his hand up for a second. No. I believe it was first said by Benjamin Franklin. I always thought this was a Bible quote, but it's not. Waste not, want not. It's a maxim that serves us to remind us that we preserve today and will help us tomorrow. I know growing up, when we had leftovers, and there was 4 of us boys, so that very rarely happened. But when we had leftovers, Mom would take those and make stew or casseroles or whatever, but we didn't throw anything out. I know that there's some that take scrap pieces of material and they make quilts. This extends to money. If we watch our pennies, then the dollars will be okay. Waste not, want not is not only good advice for us personally. Jesus Christ would agree. Waste not, want not. In the account of the feeding of the 5,000, we see that Jesus instructs his disciples to gather the leftover food, didn't he? So that none of it would be wasted. John 6:12. Some 12 baskets of surplus bread were gathered, and more than likely it was distributed to the poor around that area. One might wonder why any man can miraculously do this and then want to save the leftovers. Well, that's just the nature of Jesus Christ. And therefore, showing God's bounty is not to be wasted. The abundant blessing of God is not an invitation for poor stewardism. Consequently, the Christian steward of material things must constantly be measured against the word of Christ and his disciples as they collected this food. Nothing lost or wasted. It's certainly convincing in the face of world hunger today. You've all seen the advertisements and stuff on TV of third country worlds or places, countries where there's just starving people. And yet here in America, it goes back to that abundance. Our abundance, I think, has led us to be a very wasteful nation. Instead of being hungry, we have many of us that are obese. Not Scott, no. Scott's shaking his head, no. He's muscle. She's shaking her head, no. Anyway. And alcoholism. I mean, we have so much. Our drug use is rampant in America today. We just have so much abundance. Waste not, want not also extends to God dealing with us. To read the Bible and to learn God wasted few things in our lives. For example, he does not waste trouble we go through or the life we live for Christ. If we think about the life of Joseph, we see that God does not waste the trouble that we go through. Looking back over the losses and the crosses that he endured, things such as betrayal, false accusations, broken promises, Joseph was still able to say that God had made him fruitful in the land of the affliction. Genesis 45:5 and Genesis 50:20. God had a plan, and his pain brought about good things out of the bad. If you ever want to get pumped up about life and you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself, just read the story of Joseph and all that Joseph went to, but he remained a constant. He remained faithful. He didn't waste his life. Joseph's sorrows weren't wasted. He took them to his advantage. Romans 8:28, James 1:2 and 4. Suffering times are a Christian's harvest times. When we go through troubles, what does it do to us? When we go through a stage of life where it just seems like nothing is going right, what does that do for us? It makes us stronger. Why does it make us stronger?
Turn closer to God.
your dependence is not on self, it's on God. You come to realize that someday I can't do this by myself. I have to turn to God, and then God will lift you up. That just a cough, Joe? That's Helen. Okay, you okay, Helen? That's good. And we'll get to more about John 8:28 here in a few minutes. In the life of Matthew, we see that God does not waste our past. It has been well said that Matthew left everything and followed Jesus. Luke 5:27-28. Matthew had a sharp mind. He knew about money and numbers. He could speak Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. He was an excellent candidate to do the first gospel book. This former bookkeeper had an idea, a choice to trace the genealogy of Christ back to the royal line of David and Abraham, the father of the Jews. So God took Matthew, who was a tax collector. And tax collectors weren't thought of very highly, were they? And then, like Carol said, Romans 12:6. Someday, each and every one of us are going to be accountable to God for what we've done and what we've wasted or not wasted. We're going to be accountable because that's what the Bible says. Distractions. I mentioned that earlier. It's right for us to see certain distractions as evil in themselves. Every one of us has had distractions in their life, I would think. Time spent simply means that we have less to spend. Every distraction minute is unrecoverable. Once it's gone, it's gone. It's right to seek and make up for those times that we use in evil days. Ephesians 5:16. Ephesians 5:16, making the best use of our time. Don't waste our time because days of evil are coming. And yet, we also do not become paralyzed over other sins. There's other sins that affect us. But the wasting of our time on worldly things is a big waste of time, and it can lead to sin. Our Father wants us to grow in grace and faithful focus and will through Christ, through our difficult structures. Again, Romans 8:28. He will, through his Spirit, use us to free us from idolatry and pride and help us grow self-control. Ecclesiastes 5, Mike taught on this last Sunday. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. When we set our life on just making money and we leave God out, how much time do we waste? And then when that day comes, hi, Miss Land. How are you today? That's good. But when we waste our time on making money, when that day comes, and it will come someday, and they pack all your money and all your stuff in that big U-Haul, and they bring it to the graveyard right there where they're going to lay you in the ground. That's where it's going to stay. It ain't going with you. Yes.
Also in Proverbs, it says a wise man leaves an inheritance for his grandchildren. So, ain't nobody.
Say that again.
In Proverbs, it says a wise man leaves an inheritance for his grandchildren.
Does that inheritance have to be worldly? Can it also be? I know.
If my granddad had not done it right, I'd be a lot better off than I am right now.
I understand. But as a person, would you rather have a worldly inheritance or an inheritance that was spiritual?
That's not an easy question.
It is for me.
Because
See, Travis and Jake ain't going to get nothing. But go ahead.
And wealth gets in your way of being a Christian, then that wealth is sin. It's a stumbling block.
Right.
Likewise, if you were poor and you pray to God and you say, God, all these verses say you're going to provide, where are you providing? Then being poor is a stumbling block. So you have to separate your worldly wealth and your material success from spiritual life. But at the same time, if you are a spiritual person and a Christian, you have a responsibility, at least as a man, to provide not only for your family,
But for your grandchildren.
but your grandchildren.
And I agree with what you're saying. If we first seek the kingdom of God, and we still have the ability and talents to provide wealth, and we seek God first, then I'm like you. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I was just joking, Trav and Jake. I don't know what you'll have. It's according to how much longer Mom lives than me. Right, honey? Okay. Yes.
Go along with this, because I think, and probably most of you have been parents with grandchildren who are out of the home and married their own families, is that just as God gave us everything that we need to live our lives here, to seek spirituality, to grow, and left us an inheritance, we primarily should think about the same type of inheritance to our children. And it's both a physical inheritance and a spiritual inheritance. The physical being, and this is what I firmly believe, I'm not leaving a dime to my kids. They don't need that, okay? They don't need that. I don't have to get her anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But they need to know how to feed themselves, how to take care of their own families and nurture their own families, and how to bring them up under the Word of God, understanding what God is. So we take care of both the physical needs of our children, give them what they need to make their way in life. And there's nothing better than watching your children get out on their own and make their own way. And then one day in the future, you realize that they can teach you something that you don't know.
Right.
And then also to watch your children teach their children about Jesus and the way of how to live a godly life.
And that's very gratifying.
That's the inheritance there.
Right.
Giving somebody two nickels to rub together, that's great. But if you give them that, and you don't take care of their needs, their physical needs shown this earth, their emotional needs shown this earth, and their spiritual needs, and prepare them for the inheritance that God set up for all of us, as far as I'm concerned, you're missing the boat.
You okay, Ryan? See, Ryan, I think, has 15 or 16 kids now. Got one more or two more in the bucket, I'm not sure. And then Jacqueline's getting ready to have a little boy. So I thought you were going to have to work forever, Tom. Based on what Brian said. I understand. There's got to be. You can't see all your focus and your energies on just making money and leave God out. You can seek God first. And if you look at Abraham, I mean, he had bunches of stuff. But was he a faithful man? Yes, he was. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to enjoy what God has given us here on earth. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 18, behold, what I have seen is a good thing, and fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in your toil. So God's saying, I've given you a lot of stuff, and it's a good thing. Enjoy it. Why should we live here and never enjoy what God has given us? Since the fall of man has had a tough time staying focused. But we live today in an age of unprecedented distraction. Like y'all said in the beginning, there's social media, There's false news. There's just so much stuff that distracts us as grown-ups, but also our children. Many times I'll come home from work and the grandkids get off the bus there at the house, some of them. And, hey kids, they're on that phone or on that computer. So you say it again. Hey kids. And then I say, Nana, or Rhonda will say, she's also Nana. Kids, your papa's home. Hey, papa. So our kids get so distracted. And maybe that's our responsibility, as maybe Brian was saying. It's our responsibility to focus. I know when they were off earlier with the snow, and then I think they were off a day because the teachers were sick and couldn't go to school that day. I'm sorry about that. That wasn't politically correct, but that's just who I am. Anyway, I sent them all a text because I knew they'd be on their phones. And I said, it'd be a good day to start reading the book of Proverbs. In a little while, I heard back from one of them. Papa, I read the first 8 verses. And then a couple of days later, Papa, I read 1 through 3, the first 3 chapters. So sometimes we need to encourage, not push it down their throats, but just encourage our children or our grandchildren. What's most important in this world? What's most important? It's not playing those games. Those games ain't going to get you nowhere. I'll tell you one more story about games. When the thing first came out, the computer thing, and there was a game on there called Space Armada, and I think it was in television. And it was raining and thundering, so I couldn't go outside and do anything. So I was downstairs on the TV, and I was just shooting them guys up to pieces. I was getting every one of them. Well, about that time, I ended up across the floor. I figured they'd shot back. So I said, what's going on? So a couple of days later, and of course it burned everything up. And I figured that was God's way of saying, you don't need to do this. You need to read the book of Proverbs. But anyway, so a couple of days later, I was out mowing the yard. And I smelled a strong creosote smell. And I looked up at the top of the light pole where our transformer was. And it was just splintered. Lightning had struck that, run down the pole, underground, in the house, to my Intellivision game. And knocked me home across the floor. So don't get distracted. That's my story for the day. I just made that part up. No, that really happened. Distractions, at least the dangerous kinds. And I don't know if y'all remember, but one of the lessons that Mike taught back last year that really affected me. And I sent him a text. And I said, that lesson you did yesterday was a great lesson because it applies to me. But it was a lesson on distractions. So I'd sent him a text and says, Mike, do you have a copy of that lesson? And he gave me 2 that weren't it. Is that a word, weren't? Anyway, so I went back and I found my text on the day that I had sent it. And it was August 20th. And I said, Mike, I need the lesson from August 19th. And so he sent it to me. And it was on distractions. Distractions are tied to choices. The choices that we make kind of go together with distractions that we're into. If we're distracted to do this, very rarely are we going to do this. We have to be careful about distractions. One of the fundamental and most dangerous problems we have with distractions is it leads us away from God. our tendency to shift our attention and orientation from the greatest object in existent is to lesser ones. The Bible calls that idolatry. When we go from God to something that replaces God, that's idolatry. Our attention often runs to what's important to us, so the distraction can reveal what's truly important to us. If we do this every day and we don't do for God, then we're setting a priority in our life. And we're saying, hey, this is more important than him. And how much trouble can we get into? As I first said, every time that we're distracted and we set something before God, it's going to lead up in a mess. When we become prodigal sons or daughters, then it's going to lead to something that's not very worthy. The fundamental attention shift disorders in a very perversive way. We find our tendency to be distracted from more than one thing usually leads to a cascading down. Once you make that decision, that this is what I'm going to dedicate, this is what I'm going to be distracted, this is a priority that I'm going to set in my life, it usually goes downhill. Whenever we leave God out of that equation, it's not going to be good. We're going to go down. All our distractions, when they're the evil ones, go back to Satan and his power over us, his power to control us. And I've heard it taught that Satan is different from God because God is everywhere. He knows everything all the time. I think once we let Satan into our lives, and that usually happens when we're very young, when we let Satan in our lives, he is with us all the time. That temptation, that little voice in the back of our head that tries to distract us, he is there all the time. And in relationship to God, God's there all the time too. God's never going to leave us. He's never going to forsake us. But Satan, once we let him in our lives, he's there. Do y'all agree with that?
I don't. I think he will flee.
He will flee. But still, that ember is always there. Somewhere in your memory, Satan is always there. He will flee from you at that moment, I agree. When we put God first, he will flee.
I think the larger issue is not really, we don't always want him to flee.
That's true. That's true.
I think we have to be mindful of it. I don't think Satan has power over us. I think our choice has a lot to do with it. I think we need to present a beautiful plan. It's up to us if we take a piece of whatever's on the plan.
Right. I think you're right. But the devil is there. He's there to whisper in your ear, and if y'all have all watched cartoons, you see the guy with the little horns on one side and the guy with a little halo on the other side. Well, sometimes the little guy in the horns wins, doesn't he? He does in my life. I hope he doesn't in yours, but we all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But Satan, to me, is always there. Yes, when we're tempted and we seek God, God's going to win if we want him to. Like Steve said, it's choice. It's the choices that we make every day in our lives, whether Satan's going to be there or not going to be there. If Satan's going to win or God's going to win.
I think oftentimes, sorry, I'm trying to be in, but
That's okay. Speak.
I would truly believe that we do. Because I know sometimes it's like, I do something and I know that it was by my choice. The devil made me do it. No, but he didn't.
He did.
He decided to do that one
Yeah.
time.
See, God gave us the ability to make free choice, didn't he?
Free will.
We're not robots. How many of y'all have done that thing on a computer? You go to a site and it says, "Are you a robot?" That's kind of like, what was that word I used the first week? Anyway, robot. But it says, "Are you a robot?" And you check a little box. And it's got scrambled letters below, and you type those in. It shows that you're not a robot. Am I the only one that does that on the computer? Okay, no. Okay. I was worried there for a second. I thought God might be singling me out or something. But anyway, we're not robots. God didn't make us that way. God gave us the ability to choose. But like Steve was saying, we can also choose to do good things, can't we? We can let those distractions be good distractions. Do you have your hand up, Steve? You're not Steve, you're Jeff. Steve's over here. Okay. I get confused so easy. No, he's got hair. Anyway, when we're regularly distracted from something, we take note. Our attention often runs what's important to us. So a distraction can reveal what we love. I've made John and Rhonda mad, so I'm sorry. I just know where you're going. This happened to Jesus with his friend Martha. Remember, Martha is busy in the kitchen when Jesus taught in her home. Martha complained to her sister, "Mary, you're not helping me." Because what was Mary doing? What was she being distracted by? Good works. She was at the feet of Jesus, and she was hearing the teacher teach. And Jesus says to her, Luke 10:41 and 42, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and you're troubled about things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." Mary was distracted from Jesus. By what? Well, she was serving her guests, which is a good thing, because she was anxious. She was wanting to please those that were in her home and her guests. I think that's a woman thing. Anxious about feeding everyone. In likelihood, she was anxious about everybody would think of her. Is she a good hostess? God is not necessarily or not nearly as interested in our efficiency as he is in our faith. Our faith drives us. But Martha didn't recognize her distraction until Jesus helped her see her heart. She thought she was doing the right thing by serving everyone. But Jesus pointed out to Martha, and her values were disordered. She shifted her attention from the greater important thing until the lesser important thing. We have to look at what our heart desires, and our heart should desire Jesus. And it builds our faith. It humbles us. I'm not going to get done, so I'm going to do this last part. I once saw this plaque, and on it these words were written: "Only one life, 'twill soon pass. Only what done for Christ will last." To the left of the word, these words, was painted a green hill with two trees and a brown path that disappeared over the hill. As I looked down the path, I said, that's my life, and wondered what would be over that hill. The message was clear. You get one pass in life. That's all. Only one. We shouldn't waste our time, our resources, our talents on worldly things. One time at a men's retreat, they went around the room, and I reckon the lesson was on wasted, but or regret. What's one thing that you really regret in life? What is one thing that you really, really regret? And when it came my time to answer, my biggest regret in this life is I took so long to use my talents, whatever they are, to work for the Lord. I was completely distracted by life. I was completely distracted by this world. And it took me such a long time to recognize what I needed to do and who I needed to be. And one of the biggest reasons that I did that is because of the people of this church. The people of this church, more than not, are servants. They're servant leaders. And they're good examples to set. Why do we come to church? We come to church to be edified and built up, to educated, to worship God. Well, I remember when Ed got sick. I can't count the number of people that went over and stayed with Ed, that provided food for Ed. When others have gotten sick or they have a need, it's them first. And as a Christian, when you see that happen, man, that's what Christianity's all about, is, in my opinion, is to help those that are in need, to do for others before we do for ourselves. It's more blessed to give than receive, to do the things of the Lord. I'll close with this. If we're given $86,400 every day to spend the way we would like, and at the end of each day we didn't spend what we didn't spend, it was lost, what would we do? We wouldn't have to think too hard, would we? Or engage in a long discourse. We'd take that money, and son, we'd spend it. Each day we're given 86,400 seconds. It's been that way forever. 86,400 seconds every day to do with what we please. It's our choice to do with those seconds whatever we want to do. There's one deal, though. You might say this gift comes with a hidden cost. Whatever time we don't use wisely, at the end of the day, it's gone. You can't go back the next day and say, man, I wish I had 60 more seconds. It's gone. That choice needs to be made. A plan needs to be made what we're going to do. As I told you all on that first Sunday that I taught, for me, it's to get into a routine. The first thing you do, you fix a cup of coffee. And then you take that coffee and you go downstairs where it's quiet and you put on some gospel music on your iPad and you exercise. Once you've done exercising, you go back to that coffee. It's not near as hot now, so you can drink it. And you drink that cup of coffee and you read the Bible. And what I do is I read it and I listen to it because it plays and I hear it, what it says. But I get into a routine, and to me that works. Every day, that's my first mission. That's my first priority. That's my first choice. That's my first distraction, is to do what the Lord wants me to do. Mr. John's teaching us next week. I'm glad he's shaking his head up and down. You all probably are too. Thank you all for your attention.